The Cold War, a time of fear, a time of tension. Two superpowers stood toe-to-toe, the United States and the Soviet Union. Their shadows loomed large over the entire world. At the heart of this fear was the nuclear bomb. It was the ultimate weapon, a tool of unimaginable destruction. Or was it? What if this terrifying power was not entirely real? Imagine for a moment a different story. A story where the biggest bombs were a grand deception, a carefully crafted illusion. This idea seems impossible, yet history is full of secrets. The concept of nuclear weapons as a scam is shocking. It challenges our understanding of a critical period. For decades, the world lived under the nuclear threat. School children practiced duck and cover drills. Governments built bunkers deep underground. The doctrine of mutually assured destruction or MAD shaped global politics. It suggested that a nuclear war would destroy everyone. This fear was a powerful force. It influenced alliances, it fueled proxy wars, it defined an entire era of human existence. Could such a profound fear be based on a lie? Consider the scale of such a deception. It would require immense coordination. It would need the silence of thousands. Scientists, engineers, politicians, and spies, all would have to be complicit. Or perhaps only a very few at the top knew the truth. The rest might have believed the official narrative. They worked on components. They saw tests from afar. They analyzed data that was carefully curated. The possibility seems remote. Yet the stakes were incredibly high during the Cold War. Leaders sought any advantage. Why would any power perpetrate such a monumental hoax? The reasons could be complex. Perhaps it was about control. Control over their own populations, control over their allies, control over their adversaries. A mythical superweapon could be more useful than a real one. It could achieve strategic goals without the risk of actual annihilation. It could also prevent smaller, messier conventional wars. The threat alone might have been the true weapon. This essay will explore this unsettling hypothesis. We will look at how such a deceit might have begun and why. The year was 1949. The United States was the sole nuclear power, or so the world believed. Then the Soviet Union announced its own atomic test. This event shocked the West. It officially started the nuclear arms race. But what if Moscow discovered something else that year? Something far more astounding than just how to build a bomb. Soviet scientists were brilliant. They worked tirelessly to catch up with American technology. They pored over intelligence reports. They analyzed espionage data. They examined samples from American tests where possible. Imagine Soviet physicists in a hidden laboratory. They are studying the American atomic designs. They replicate calculations. They scrutinize the reported yields of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs. Perhaps they found discrepancies. Maybe the energy released was not as catastrophic as claimed, or the truly unique destructive aspects were less reliable. The heat, the blast, yes, but the almost supernatural lingering doom. What if they found the physics of a city-destroying chain reaction harder to achieve reliably than the Americans let on? This would be a state secret of the highest order, a revelation that could change everything for them. Stalin was a shrewd and ruthless leader. He understood power. He knew how to use fear. If his scientists told him the American bomb was partly a bluff, how would he react? He might see an incredible opportunity. Instead of exposing the potential exaggeration, why not join the game? Why not build their own superweapon based on the same principles? The fear it generated was undeniable. It gave America immense global influence. Stalin would want that same influence for the Soviet Union. He could turn a scientific puzzle into a geopolitical masterstroke. This moment in 1949 could be the genesis. The point where the scam, if it was one, became a shared secret. Not shared through open discussion, but shared through tacit understanding. The Soviets would not call out the Americans. They would instead rush to create their own fearsome image. They would announce their bomb. They would imply its terrible power. The Cold War's central terror was thus potentially born not just from a new weapon, but from a mutual understanding that its myth was as important as its mechanics. A silent agreement to terrify the world together. Following their 1949 breakthrough, the Soviet Union moved swiftly. They did not expose any potential American exaggeration. Instead, they embraced the nuclear narrative wholeheartedly. They conducted their own tests, they issued their own dire warnings. The arms race escalated, seemingly confirming the terrible power of these weapons. If the initial premise was a partial bluff by the US, the Soviets decided to raise the stakes. They would become equal partners in this grand theater of terror. This was not collusion in the typical sense, it was a convergence of interests. The United States, observing the Soviet actions, had choices. If they knew their own weapon's true nature was more limited, or its effects more controllable than publicly portrayed, they saw Moscow playing the same game. They saw the Soviets building up the same mystique. There was no incentive to reveal the truth then. Doing so would undermine their own global power. It would diminish the fear that kept potential adversaries in check. So the American establishment likely doubled down. More tests, bigger bombs announced, more terrifying rhetoric. The two giants fed each other's narratives, thus a silent, unacknowledged pact might have formed, a pact built on shared deception. Mutually assured deception rather than mutually assured destruction could have been the real mad. Both superpowers benefited from the world believing in their godlike destructive capabilities. It allowed them to project power far beyond their conventional military reach. It helped keep their respective alliances in order. Allies huddled under the nuclear umbrella, real or not. This umbrella provided a sense of security, however illusory. It also ensured loyalty to the superpower providing it. This period saw the Cold War solidify. The Iron Curtain descended. Proxy wars flared up in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, but direct conflict between the US and USSR was avoided. Was this due to the fear of nuclear annihilation, or was it because both sides understood the rules of the game they were playing? The nuclear threat served as a convenient excuse. It kept the world on edge. Yet, it also imposed a strange kind of stability, a stability built upon a potentially monumental falsehood, known only to a select few at the very top of each nation. The Cold War became a grand stage for the nuclear drama. Both superpowers were actors. They put on elaborate shows to convince the world. Nuclear tests were key performances. Think of the images from the era, giant mushroom clouds blooming in remote deserts or distant atolls. These images were potent symbols. They screamed of unimaginable power. But what if these tests were carefully managed? What if the yields were sometimes enhanced by conventional explosives? Or the visual effects cleverly engineered for maximum psychological impact? The goal was to create fear. Missile parades were another part of the show. Think of Red Square in Moscow. Rows of massive intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, rumbled past. They were symbols of Soviet might. The West displayed its own missiles, submarines and bombers. These were props in the global theater. They looked menacing. They were meant to look menacing. The message was clear: we can destroy you. But the actual destructive capability of the warheads they carried remained shrouded in secrecy, a secrecy that served the narrative of ultimate power held by both sides. Espionage played a curious role. Spies from both sides worked to uncover secrets. They sought to understand the enemy's capabilities, but what if they, too, were part of the audience? What if they found evidence that confirmed the official story, evidence that was perhaps intentionally planted? Or if a spy got too close to a more nuanced truth, they might be discredited, or their information buried. The intelligence game itself could have reinforced the deception. Each side confirmed the other's terrifying arsenal. This made the illusion stronger. Smaller nations watched these displays with awe and terror. They had little choice but to believe. The scientific complexity was beyond most. The secrecy was impenetrable. So they aligned themselves accordingly. They sought protection from one superpower or the other. This enhanced the superpower's global standing. They became the arbiters of planetary fate. The nuclear myth solidified their dominance. The world was held captive by a narrative of potential doom, a narrative meticulously maintained by its main protagonists. Section 5. The rationale for the ruse Part 1, Global Control. Why would these powerful nations perpetrate such a complex hoax? One major reason could be global control. The Cold War was a battle for ideological supremacy. It was a struggle for influence over hearts and minds worldwide. A mythical superweapon offered a unique tool for achieving this. It allowed the United States and the Soviet Union to project an image of overwhelming power. This image could cow potential rivals. It could also keep restless allies firmly within their respective spheres of influence. Fear in this context became a currency of international relations. Imagine the world without the nuclear threat, or with a much reduced one. Superpower influence would depend more on conventional military strength. It would rely on economic power and diplomatic skill. These are more complex and less certain tools. A doomsday weapon, however, simplified things. It created a clear hierarchy. At the top were the nuclear states. Everyone else was, to some degree, subservient or at risk. This perception of ultimate power allowed the superpowers to dictate terms. They could intervene in regional conflicts. They could shape international institutions to their liking. Furthermore, the nuclear myth could help control domestic populations. In times of great external threat, people tend to rally around their leaders. The constant drumbeat of potential nuclear annihilation served this purpose. It justified massive military spending. It legitimized intrusive security measures. It discouraged dissent. The enemy was not just an ideological opponent, they were an existential threat armed with planet-killing weapons. This narrative helped maintain social cohesion and political stability at home, even during times of internal stress or economic difficulty. The economic aspect is also worth considering. While maintaining a nuclear arsenal, even a partially fake one, was expensive, it might have been seen as cost-effective in the long run. It could, theoretically, reduce the need for even larger conventional forces. A handful of nukes could deter an adversary that might otherwise require millions of soldiers to counter. This is, of course, debatable, as both sides also maintained huge conventional armies. However, the psychological leverage provided by the nuclear threat was an undeniable and perhaps cheaper force multiplier in the grand game of global power projection. Section 6, the rationale for the ruse, Part 2, the doomsday deterrent. Beyond direct global control, another powerful motivation for the nuclear deception could have been the idea of a doomsday deterrent. The memory of two devastating world wars was still fresh. Leaders were desperate to avoid a third global conflict. A conventional war between the superpowers, with their vast armies and industrial capacity, would have been catastrophic. It would have dwarfed previous conflicts in scale and destruction. The nuclear threat, even if exaggerated, offered a way to prevent this. It created a balance of terror. This balance of terror, based on mutually assured destruction, was the central pillar of Cold War stability. The logic was simple: if both sides could destroy each other, neither would dare to strike first. This doctrine, however, relied on the weapons being truly annihilating. If they were merely very large bombs, the deterrent effect might be lessened. But if the myth of inescapable civilization-ending power was maintained, then caution would prevail. The superpowers might engage in proxy wars, they might posture and threaten, but they would pull back from the brink of direct confrontation. The bomb thus became a psychological tool of unprecedented scale. It was a monster kept in the basement. Its growls were enough to keep the peace upstairs, however uneasy that peace might be. This theory suggests that leaders, perhaps on both sides, understood the limitations of their own weapons, but they also understood the immense utility of the fear these weapons generated. They chose to perpetuate the myth, not out of pure cynicism perhaps, but out of a desperate desire to prevent a far greater conventional catastrophe. A terrible choice, if true. This deterrent effect extended beyond the superpowers. It discouraged reckless actions by other nations as well. The shadow of the bomb loomed over every international crisis. It forced leaders to think twice. It created a framework, however flawed, for managing global tensions. The deception in this view was not just about power, it was about survival. It was a dangerous game, played for the highest stakes, the prevention of World War III. The Cold War remained cold, in large part because both sides feared it turning hot, and that fear was meticulously cultivated. Section 7, Mighty Bang or Mighty Bluff, Deconstructing the Bomb. Let us examine the nature of these supposed superweapons. The images are iconic. The mushroom cloud, the flattened cities, the tales of radioactive fallout, these are deeply ingrained in our collective consciousness. But what if the reality was more akin to incredibly powerful conventional explosives? Think of dense TNT. A massive amount of trinitrotoluene or a similar high explosive could create a very big bang. It could certainly flatten buildings over a significant area. It could generate immense heat and a powerful shockwave. The distinctive mushroom cloud, often cited as unique to nuclear explosions, can also be produced by large conventional explosions. Any sufficiently powerful blast that throws vast quantities of dust and debris high into the atmosphere can create this effect. The visual signature alone is not conclusive proof of a nuclear chain reaction of the type described. The key difference, according to official science, lies in the nuclear fission or fusion process. This process is said to release vastly more energy and create unique radioactive isotopes. But the measurement and interpretation of these effects were tightly controlled. Consider the secrecy surrounding all nuclear programs. Test sites were remote, data was classified, access was restricted. This environment was perfect for managing information. It was ideal for exaggerating successes or hiding failures. What if the yields of early bombs were inconsistent? What if the radioactive fallout was less widespread or less uniquely dangerous than portrayed? Or conversely, what if its effects were difficult to weaponize predictably? The narrative of a controllable yet overwhelmingly powerful weapon served the strategic interests of those who possessed it or claimed to possess it. The theory of a nuclear scam suggests that the special properties of nuclear weapons, the ones that made them qualitatively different from conventional arms, were either exaggerated or misunderstood by the public. The psychological impact of terms like radiation sickness or nuclear winter was immense. These concepts created a unique horror. If this horror was based on a significant overstatement of actual reliable effects, then the bomb was primarily a weapon of psychological warfare. Its greatest impact was on the minds of people, not necessarily on the physical world in the way commonly believed. Section 8. Echoes in the 21st century. A new geopolitical game. If we entertain this startling theory, what does it mean for today in 2025? The Cold War is over, but nuclear weapons, or the belief in them, persist. Several nations now claim to possess these arsenals. International diplomacy still revolves around non-proliferation. Deterrence strategies are still based on the threat of nuclear retaliation. If the original nukes were a sophisticated bluff, the implications for current geopolitics are profound. It would require a complete re-evaluation of global security architectures. The very foundation of nuclear deterrence would crumble. For decades, peace between major powers has been attributed to this grim calculus. If that calculus was based on a falsehood, then what truly kept the peace? And more importantly, what will keep it now? The power dynamics would shift dramatically. Nations that have invested heavily in nuclear arsenals might find their ultimate trump card devalued. Conversely, nations with strong conventional forces might see their relative power increase. The global balance of power would be thrown into disarray. Consider the impact on trust. If it were revealed that the world's most powerful nations perpetrated such a deception for generations, public faith in governments and international institutions would plummet. This could lead to widespread instability. It might also embolden revisionist powers. They might challenge the existing world order, believing the ultimate deterrent was never real. The race to develop these ultimate weapons by countries like North Korea or Iran would be seen in a new light. Were they chasing a chimera, or were they trying to join a club whose main perk was psychological leverage? Furthermore, the resources spent on developing, maintaining, and guarding these arsenals could be seen as a colossal waste. Money and scientific talent that could have addressed other global problems. The revelation could spark calls for immediate and genuine disarmament. Not just of nuclear weapons, but a renewed focus on conventional arms control. It might also, paradoxically, make large-scale conventional wars more likely. If the unthinkable nuclear option is removed, the threshold for major conflict might be lowered. The world would have to learn new rules for an old game. Section 9. The weight of a secret, if the nukes were never real. Reflecting on such a monumental theory is unsettling. The idea that the Cold War's central terror was a carefully constructed lie is difficult to accept. It challenges decades of history. It questions the sacrifices made. It redefines the anxieties of generations. The sheer scale of the required deception is almost unimaginable. It would involve a conspiracy dwarfing any other in human history. Maintaining such a secret across different governments, ideologies, and decades seems nearly impossible. Yet the motivations discussed, control, deterrence, preventing conventional war, were incredibly powerful. The implications for our understanding of the past are immense. The Cold War was not just a battle of ideologies or economies. It was potentially a battle of narratives, a contest of who could tell the most convincing, most terrifying story. The leaders of that era would be seen in a new light. Were they masters of strategy, using a grand bluff to avert greater disaster, or were they perpetuators of a fear that needlessly scarred the world? Historians would debate these questions for centuries. The archives, if they hold any clues, would become the most sought-after documents on Earth. Proving or disproving such a theory today is extraordinarily difficult. The original data is likely still classified, or was perhaps never fully reliable. Those who knew the full truth, if any, are likely long gone. We are left with circumstantial evidence, logical inference, and unsettling questions. The official narrative of nuclear weapons is deeply entrenched. It is backed by scientific establishments and military institutions. Challenging it requires a bold leap of imagination, but history often contains surprises. What seems certain today can be overturned by new discoveries or perspectives tomorrow. Ultimately, the theory of a nuclear scam, whether true or not, forces us to consider the nature of power. It makes us think about perception in global affairs. Belief can be as potent as reality. Fear can shape nations and control populations. The Cold War showed how a terrifying idea, whether fully real or partially fabricated, could define an age. Perhaps the biggest lesson is that the stories we tell ourselves and the stories our leaders tell us have immense power. They can build walls, they can start races, they can keep a fragile peace, or they can lead us down paths of profound deception. The shadow of the mushroom cloud, real or illusory, still lingers. Still